elsewhere across the continent, it is faced with conflicts, especially with the local communities where they have to be relocated to pave way for the projects. Conflicts are endemic to the society and have been unavoidable since time immemorial. Conflicts usually arise where people interact, and also including in developmental projects like this one, because of incompatible interests. These conflicts are often the conflicts are usually triggered by, whether they are violent or non-violent, you find that they are triggered by discontentment of the parties that are involved because of largely marginalization of the community, their relocation, disruption of their livelihoods. And if unresolved, conflicts have the potential to actually result to war, hostility and war, which in cases of developmental projects can delay the projects, increase their costs, lead to their rejection by the community, their termination, and in worst case scenario, even loss of lives. Conflicts apparently take a similar angle across the globe. For example, in Germany, the case of Vattenfall project at Basco area, which entailed the exploration of this particular area for storage of carbon dioxide, was cancelled because it was not able to build trust among the local communities who were concerned about the potential risks associated with the CO2 storage, including leakages, fatal accidents, and also oil contamination, among other concerns. The Tangkuban Parahu mega project, that is in Indonesia, was also halted following a demonstration of over 800 people, that is the local community, who were dissatisfied because of the alleged discrimination in compensation and also the potential landslides that will have been associated with the project. In case of the Niger Delta Oil Development Project, which collapsed because the Ugan community protested against the project because of the extensive oil contamination, severe environmental degradation, which also had impact on their health and also disrupted the livelihoods of the community. It resulted into this community being militarized with unmargined consequences such as deaths and exile of even the key people who were spearheading the protests. In Kenya, the Talo Oil Project, the wind projects, among others in Turkana, were also fueled by conflicts because of the unmet project expectations, while the implementation of the Mui Basin Coal project in Kitui also delayed because of the concerns by the local community over the benefit sharing, as well as the alleged impropriety and corruption that was involved in the tendering of this particular project. Geothermal energy development, it is well in line with the countries, that is Kenya's Vision 2030 of becoming a middle-income country by 2030 by providing quality of life to its citizens in a secure and a clean environment, and also in line to its the country's global commitment to sustainable development goals, in particular goal number 7 and 13, 7 on clean, affordable, sustainable and modern energy for all, and 13 climate action. The establishment of Volcario 4 project, which has the capacity to generate about 440 megawatts of power, was faced by conflicts with the local communities which had to be relocated to pave way for the project. However, as much as we have quite a number of studies on communities' interactions with geothermal projects, that is globally, we have little in Kenya, and that which is available is actually insufficiently incomprehensive with regards to community reactions in respect to such projects, especially so where the undemocratic processes, including adequate participation, is involved in conceptualization and implementation of such projects. Theory of vested interest was applied in this particular study, and according to this theory, it provides for the examination of developmental of particular environmental conflicts and the parties that are involved, and also their interests. So according to Steinbach, the parties are categorized as the state, the producer, the state, the producer, and the consumer. In this case, the state refers to the government of Kenya, of which whose interest, of course, was for development to establish the geothermal project so that it can be able to to supply electricity, contribute to the national grid, develop the country, and of course meet its green global commitments with regards to green energy. Also, it had the mandate or obligation to protect the rights of the citizen to a clean environment. So during this time, this process, the environmental social assessment was conducted, which demonstrated that there will have been negative potential impacts to the community, and therefore the relocation of the community was endorsed. Also, the state, of course, had this interest in the existing infrastructure in geothermal block, where the area which has potential to generate for generating the geothermal energy because of the volcanic activities in the Rift Valley. The producer, which is Kengen here in this case, of course, working closely with the government to meet its aim, was interested in the land for production of the power, while the community, which are dominated by the Maasai, were interested in the traditional land, which they had already invested in cultural villages that were difficult to compensate in monetary terms. And while they were relocated, their concerns were about having suitable transport to be able to access market centers because the distance had increased. They also had concerns about unfair compensation, poor terrain, built houses that were not in line with the Maasai Manyatas, and also other unmet expectations. So these particular varying interests by the actors are the ones that actually were behind the conflicts that were that arose during the implementation of the particular project. The study area, the study was conducted in Nakuru County, in Olongonot sublocation within Rapland, the new site where the community was relocated in 4 villages, including Olosinyat, Olongonot, Cultural Center, and Olomaya Nandogo. Materials and methods. The reconnaissance was conducted in May 2019, during which 4 research assistants were recruited. 2 had or secondary or level education equivalent. 1 had a master's and the other had a first degree. These research assistants were trained on different aspects of the semi-structured questionnaire and also on the etiquette of collecting data within the community so we can leave the community at peace. And then the pilot testing was conducted and to fine-tune the performance of the questionnaire. Data was collected between May and November 2013. Blended methodology was used to collect quantitative data and qualitative data. In this case, quantitative data, of course, involved the age of respondents, the number of the PAPs, that is project affected people, and then also the number of people in the households. Qualitative information was in regards to relocation, why the community resisted, and through the implementation of the project. Sample size, the study targeted 155 households because these are the communities, the number of households that were resettled to Rapland, to the new site. However, 117 were surveyed, 24 were unoccupied, 24 households were unoccupied by the time of the study because they had moved out of Rapland in search of greener pasture, while 14 were inaccessible. They will go out working and they will come back late to their household, so it was quite difficult to access them. Data sources, primary data. This included the use of semi-structured questionnaires that were administered systematically on households. And also the 3 focus group discussions were conducted, one with elders, another one with women, and then the 3rd one was with youth, comprised of men and female and male. The female, elders and male were separated so that it could provide a free, conducive environment for the women to participate and contribute freely to the study objectives. The 8 key informants, these focus group discussions consisted of 8 people each. The key informants were also conducted with 8 participants, then also observation and photography was done. Secondary data, desktop review of both published and unpublished literature, local and international was conducted. on issues to do with development and the conflicts and the conflicts that are associated with the same. Descriptive statistics was used, that is a combination of frequencies and percentages to analyze quantitative data, while data was also, the in vivo software was used in the coding and analysis of qualitative data. Data was displayed using illustrations, graphs, and tables. Results, conflict, the first figure, figure 2, represents the phases of the conflicts, which were involved during the project inception, the community relocation, and also the project during project implementation. So during the inception phase, the respondents indicated that they had received information. They learned that Kengen, which is the developer, had identified the Olkaria 4 areas, suitable area to put up for geothermal 4 projects. And therefore, environmental social impact assessment was conducted, which demonstrated potential negative impacts on the community's health, and which made that by this information, they had been told that they'll have to be relocated to pave way for the project, which was also in the interest of the global nation to contribute to electricity supply. Also, the information that was received that was exciting to the respondents was about the numerous socioeconomic benefits that will have come along with the project, including the bursaries, scholarships, improved livelihoods, improved living standards, modern houses. Okay, then the sources of information. This information was mainly received by the PAPs. From the elders, 44%, Kengen 39%, neighbors 13%, and others 4%. So the initiation phase is very important to a development, because the information that is received and how this information is received will really determine if the project will be acceptable within the community and also its sustainability. So the initiation phase is basically the foundation for potential conflicts should any information that has been relayed at this moment, and for example, the numerous socioeconomic benefits not be met later on by the developer. Relocation phase, the 57% stated that they were ready to relocate. And importantly, because they had been promised, quote in quotes, they said a little heaven, the numerous socioeconomic benefits. So that was exciting to them, and they were ready to embrace the project and relocate. However, irrespective of that, 43% were still hesitant. And this is the group that really now was involved with the confrontation and, the conflicts that were witnessed in the Olkaria 4 area. 77% indicated that they were unsatisfied with the relocation process, the way the process was handled. They were not happy with it. And then 80% say that because of that, 80% say that they will not recommend the way the relocation process was handled to any other community, or even among themselves if they have to be relocated again. This actually demonstrates some kind of improper planning in relocation arrangements that was also contributed to the conflicts in the local community. During the implementation phase, now this is the stage whereby there was anxiety over unfulfilled pledges by the community members. And the concerns, numerous concerns when they went there, find that some pledges had not been met, and their concerns therefore led to the complaints and the conflicts even after their settlement, and forced the PAPs to write to the project financiers for intervention, including the World Bank and the European Investment Bank. The types of conflicts that were witnessed included the socioeconomic, 51%, as 21% said environmental, 14% cultural, and another 14% political conflicts. Socioeconomic conflict was related to the fact that the respondents indicated that they were poorly handled during the relocation, whereby it was very impromptu. They had a very short notice, and then the policemen were brought along, and they were told that they had to locate by a particular time. They were given time to relocate. And also they claimed that they were not adequately compensated to enable them even be able to buy some basic facilities, food and furniture, to be able to settle in the new environment. The poor terrain was also a concern in this case. Find that the area is actually full of the gullies and the valleys, and so it was a main concern, especially for the elderly people and also the disabled. The distance, having relocated from the project site, the distance had increased. So to the market, to the project site, and also to the shopping centers, including the Kamere and the Naivasha. So this meant that also they had to spend more, dig deeper into their pockets to be able to take care of the transport, which was worsened by the lack of transport in this particular community against their competing interests. Will they be paying much on transport or buying food to be able to feed their children or their households? So with the increase in distance also meant that the business had declined, especially this was in particular affecting people, members from the cultural center villages who were involved in cultural activities, performances at the cultural center area, and also making of the ornaments where they sell, which they sold to the tourists. So with the increased distance meant that they opened the businesses late, and sometimes they'll not even go because of lack of transport, and of course now affecting the employment aspect. They were also concerned about the inadequate and unreliable water, including in the Rappland, including the unfurnished houses, some which lacked basic facilities like electricity for them to be able to adopt to the new environment. The decline in livestock was also complete, mainly because of the topography of the area, full of the gullies and the valleys, which of course will lead to accidents where livestock will fall in and die, and also the low quality pasture, which was scarce. So you find that this particular aspect, the decline of livestock, which is the main livelihood activities of the particular community of this, the PAPs, is a potential source of further conflict, because in the event, which is the main source of in the event they will have to redeem it, they may probably be forced to engage into castle wrestling as witnessed in other arid and semi-arid areas in the country. Generally, the unfulfilled promises led to distrust against the developer by the PAPs. But then we see that some studies, Menta and Okiere state that, and also Schilling state that, whilst the pledges are fully translated into actions, they have potential to reduce the conflict with the community, as also seen in other geothermal projects in the Philippines, where this aspect has been adopted and worked for them. Environmental conflict was basically related to frequent droughts. At first sight, when you go to study site, that is Rappland, the area looks very dry and frequently, looks that it's frequently visited by droughts, severe soil erosion, perhaps worsened by the volcanic type of soil. The gully and slides in the valleys were also a concern because in the event of an accident to animals, they will lose their livestock and also the community members. I remember when we were doing our study or fieldwork, we almost became a victim of the valleys. So I will understand when they talk of the valleys, having concerns about the valleys and the gullies. Wildlife conflict, the respondents indicated that the noise and the hyenas in particular were nuisance to them because they were killing their livestock on a daily basis, resulting to their decline of the number of the livestock that they had. This also compounded by the poor quality of forage and also the quantity, finding that having to graze their livestock on the valleys on top of the hills was a bit of a challenge. Then there are also issues of low environmental and social safeguards. The community was not very much convinced that some of the community members were not very much convinced that the project had really danger on their health. And also we see that according to World Bank, environmental social policy, and in particular environmental social framework number 5 on land acquisition and involuntary settlement, the community are supposed to be settled to a land that will either restore their livelihoods or even make them better. So they had concerns about these aspects. The cultural conflict was mainly related to attachment to the ancestral land, the homes, change or loss of livelihood. So ancestral land, you find that the community, which are the PAPs, were used to their former site, as I had earlier mentioned, where they had already invested in the cultural center villages where they could perform dances to the tourism. And so they found it very hard to dissociate themselves from that particular land as much as they had to relocate to Rappland. Livestock migration and experiences, we found that the Maasais, the nomad with their way of living, they moved from one place to another in search of livestock. So they had prior experience with the new area, including the valleys and the gullies, the nature and the topography, the way it looked like. And so it is not very clear why they had to accept relocation, yet they already had this particular experience. Restricted access, well, with the establishment of the project, of course, there is fencing, and which means that the community, which are used to moving their livestock from one area freely, they means that it is restricting them to accessing particular pasture where the project's area is or where the fence are. So this is a potential source of conflict, in particular resource, pasture use conflicts, or resource use conflict between the PAPs, the community, and the Kenyan, and also among the communities themselves. The housing units, they had concerns about, while they were excited about the modern houses in Rappland, but they were concerned about the compatibility, because they are not compatible to their Maasai houses, that the manyatas that they are used to. You find that when they were locating, some of them had their sons excluded from being allocated a house, forcing them to have sons and girls putting up in the same room. So this was not, they were really concerned with this particular aspect. And of course, some of them were excited about the new houses, the new lifestyle, and perhaps it's just demonstration of the fact that we could be having some cultural erosion in this particular community among the Maasai, which is also witnessed. Other form of it was also, they had embraced small-scale farming, planting vegetables, maize, they're engaging in some small-scale farming. Women empowerment, they were concerned about their voices not being heard, that their views were not incorporated in regards to relocation, and they felt so much suppressed. Perhaps this is a demonstration that the women are still not, their status has not changed much, since when Hodgson, 1999, stated that women in Maasai community are given equal status with children. They are seen as children. And so perhaps this status has not changed much. And as much as the Constitution of Kenya, Chapter 4 on Bills of Rights, which provides for inclusion of women in decision-making at all levels, from the national to the local levels, from the local to the national levels, it's definitely may confirm that the extent to which there's still little implementation of this particular constitution. Imposed decisions, here the community was concerned by the fact that, among the Maasais, they have leaders who make decisions for them. So they felt that the decisions, the leaders, while some of them were not for relocating, the leaders had already made decisions. So they were forced to comply with the overall decisions made by the community leaders, which also made them feel like probably the leaders had been, community leaders had been bribed or something of the sort. Political conflicts, there were concerns about adequate and improper sharing of information, including on land formation, and also the project, the effects of project, negative effects of the project on the community health. They felt like they were not being given sufficient information, scientific information, demonstrating that actually the project will have impacted negatively on them. There are also claims of minimal involvement in meetings and decision-making processes, that's including when the project was being conceptualized and when they were being relocated. Okay, they also say that the promises by the project, by the developer of a little heaven, quoting home, of numerous socioeconomic benefits at Rappland was a kind of a trick for them to be able to relocate, so that the developer, Kenyan, will increase their perimeter, geothermal perimeter. There are also claims of improper relocation arrangements. And of course, they say that they received very little support from the developer to be able to move. The use of threats and force, whereby they say the developer was, at some extent, they were told, if you do not move, then we will have to torch your houses, bring your houses down. They'll have to forcefully move their livestock. So they saw this as use of power to instill fear among them to be able to move. There are also claims of lack of unity among the PAPs. They felt like while some group were not for relocation, others had already overreadily accepted the pledges that had been given, and they were ready to move, so that they could not speak in one voice. Okay. The nature and the manifestation of the conflicts. These conflicts in Onkaria were peaceful, were not violent. They were peaceful. They were involved by peaceful demonstrations, demonstrations from especially the group that was very hesitant, hesitant on relocation, but it was also involved by criminal elements, including looting of the shops within the area. While half of the resisting group felt that they were grieved, they did not speak. They feared to speak because this could have just because of the likelihood, the fear of retaliation, maybe from the developer or even the financials. Then they also say that they held community meetings were organized to strategize on how to protest, whereby the youth were brought together and they were being advised on how to spearhead the protest by the elderly who could not actively engage or participate in the protests because of their age. Then also we had cases where the roads were blocked, but this of course led to confrontation with the police, with the pubs. Conflict effects, it led to abandoned businesses, importantly at the cultural center area, where they were doing performing to tourists, also making ornaments to sell. And of course, the decline in tourism activities, because particularly this period, then we had low season, people not come to an area where there's a conflict. Loss of jobs and other opportunities, and also imprisonment cases were witnessed. The PAP say that the respondents indicated that those who had been noted to participate in resistance had to lose their jobs, and of course also they were targeted and denied other opportunities like the bursaries, the scholarships, and even the compensations, other benefits. While then also the people, those who also participated in the resistance and were involved in the Resettlement Action Plan Committee were evicted from this particular committee, of course, which come with some kind of allowances and privileges. So they were evicted from the committee for them because they participated in the resistance. There are also cases of loss of friends, and they indicated that some of them had to lose friends because they didn't want to move. And of course, those who had been noted that they were relating with the people who were participating in resistance were also targeted and threatened with legal sanctions. As a result of this conflict, the community complained and wrote letters to the project financier seeking for intervention, and that is when mediation came into effect. How the conflicts were managed? The conflicts, according to respondents and from the respondents from the PAPS, project affected persons, were managed through 5 ways: competition, avoidance, collaboration, compromise, and accommodation. In competition, we find that it's whereby the community was being coerced into agreement. This is in cases where all strategies were being done by the developer to make sure that the community relocated, including threatening to bring down their houses, and also even the attempts were made to block them from seeking intervention from the financiers. Then there were also elements of divide and rule, whereby some community members were now being discriminated, they were being threatened, told that they will not be compensated if they had to continue. So, and in particular, this was during the insertion and relocation phase, and indicated by 31%. So it meant that they had to move. They had no other choice. Being the weaker party, they had to move. Then also, they also involuntarily complied because perhaps, as some of them stated, that there was no unity for them to stand together as a team and resist. So they felt like at the end of the day, they could have likely lost the battle. So they had to comply and just move. And more importantly, because the community leaders, who very influential in the Maasai communities, had already accepted to move, so they had no choice other than to relocate. Meetings were conducted between community elders in attempts to collaborate, and also between the community leaders with the PAPs to be able to talk and eye on issues. This was during all the phases of the relocation, the implementation, and during the initiation period. Compromise, the community agreed to negotiate. This is the last, it happened during the implementation when the community had already been relocated. So mediation came into place to help resolve the conflicts, the conflicts that were rising. Then accommodation, also the project had noted that they had been told that the project was meant to benefit the entire nation, and either way, they had to relocate. So in this case, they had indicated that they had to impress the project to be able to benefit the entire nation. Conclusion, we see that the conflicts were mainly as a result of inadequate sharing of the information, the inadequate participation of the PAPs in consultation decision-making processes, then also inadequate in negotiation and of the formulation of and implementation of the resettlement action plan. While also, as we have these issues, then it means that if we had proper identification of key issues for the conflicts, early enough in the project cycle, have them fully negotiated and settled, it will really go a long way in minimizing the implementation delay of this important infrastructure, and even by conflicts, by implementation of any other larger projects. The authors wish to acknowledge Kenyan officials for allowing access to Olkario area, cooperation with the PAPs at Rapland, the 4 research assistants, Professor Njoroge Garanja and the village elders for their support, and the anonymous reviewers and informants for their insight and experiences. There was no potential conflict of interest. Thank you.
All right, Lilian, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. I must say well done for the good presentation. You kept time. Now we go to the next session, which is the discussant. Fortunately, unfortunately, today I'll also wear the hat of being your discussant for this particular paper. To start with, your paper is very interesting and captures very interesting aspects when it comes to grand mega projects. The feedback I will give on your title, maybe you could reconsider telling us exactly what it is you are looking at. Are you assessing the conflicts associated with installations of this geothermal energy? Are you looking at the impacts? Because when we look at the issue of conflicts associated with mega projects, the conflict is divided into 3. There's natural resource conflict, there's the environmental conflict, and there's the community conflict. So which of these are you looking at? And if it is all of them, then maybe you would reconsider having the issue of either you're assessing it or the aspect of the impact, so that when you need to separate the two. On your introduction, when I was reading your paper, we need more information on the conflicts that Olkaria has generated. Is it mainly because of the natural resource? Because if we take the natural resource, we look into issues of how that benefit sharing aspect has checked in. Has it been done? Going by your presentation, there was coercion. And part of managing natural resource conflict management is that benefit sharing has to be done in an agreeable manner. So which aspect of this has it or have these conflicts checked in? Issues of environmental conflict, how they were moved from their ancestral land. Were they given new titles? Does it mean were there cultural aspects noted down? If in a Maasai land where they're allowed to have 10 wives, will that one house that the project was giving be sufficient enough for them? And that needs to come out in your introduction very clearly, so that it shows the conflicts associated clearly with these installations of this project. On your theoretical framework, you use the theory of vested interest. Quite a number of critiques have said that the theory of vested interest mainly supports those who have power. And the aspect of the 3 components that you gave, the state, the producer, and the consumer, is what gives it, they criticize it for that aspect. Now, when we talk about conflict, the conflict theory sets in here clearly because it is propagated by Karl Marx, And he talks about competing interest, because I could have vested interest, but not competing interest. And when you look at the theory of Karl Marx on the conflict theory, he talks about the different, how we use capitalistic nature to manage our competing interests. So if we use the same, then we are bound to have conflicts, no matter how big or small the project. Because if I have the power to silence your interests, then I will do so. Therefore, I would propose if you would use a contrast of the same vested interest using Karl Marx theory. On your steel, the issues of how conflict was managed. A key person also is Yuan Katung, who is very good in terms of conflict resolution and peace models. He brings out the issue of transdisciplinarity when it comes to solving conflicts. So if you have to have the aspect of how this conflict was managed, then Wang Kaltung has enough information in terms of how conflict can be resolved on that issue. On the issue of your methodology, which research design did you use? How did you end up? What was your sampling frame? How did you get to the sample size that you have? So that now you can explain to us, this is what we are using and how it is that you got this sample size. Here is why we now invoke the statistical data and inferential statistics, so that you're able to now show us when it comes to the results. On your results, you highlight the various conflicts witnessed, but we quite importantly is the aspect of use of statistical data. When you're putting out, this is an academic paper, therefore the use of either parametric or non-parametric statistical analysis will help tell your results better, because numbers do not lie. So if in case you use the chi-square, the chi-square would show us the relationship of from the project. You had a three-prong look where you were using the project implementation, community relocation, and community project initiation at the beginning. So if you were using statistical data, you could probably show us, is there a significant relationship between how these conflicts are associated at the project in its actual place? What is it that the conflicts that are associated? Is there relationship of sorts with these variables, whether when people are being relocated, and the kind of conflict that exists when projects are not done? So what is the relationship between this? The statistical aspect also needs to come out clearly so that your results support what you're saying. Yeah, if you choose to use the non-parametric method, you can use the chi-square especially to show relationship, or you can use Crusoe to show us still on the same things, the variances that exist, because I've seen you've used NVivo on that. So you can show us now statistically on a bit of that should come out in your results. Then the issue of how we manage conflict contradicts your title. You're telling us about how the conflicts associated with the project. And when you bring in a different variable, which is management of the conflict, then the results seem biased. On the issue of your discussion, the support, you need the support of your results to support your thinking. There are certain aspects like the environmental, the cultural aspects that were in your discussion, and others that have not been put in your discussion, which are still which your results were supporting. So the results that you use in the paper should also be used in your discussion as well. On the issue of the conclusion, the conclusion is you state specifically what you have been discussing from the onset, which is the conflict associated with the installation of these projects, all the way down to how you have the results supporting the same, and a discussion. So you just give a summary of that which you have discussed, not to include any other issue that is not associated with the paper. When it comes to your references, a number, it's good that you have some current references, but maybe you could also consider adding recent ones with a range of from 5 years from now, so that you have current references. However, the references you have meet the discussion or the subject matter for your discussion in the paper. So in general, your paper is good. Just to change those few corrections, and you will have a solid paper. I'd also request if you could also have maybe a different paper where now you use only qualitative data to explain the emotive side of these conflicts that are associated with the installation of geothermal energy. Yes, that is my feedback on your paper. So moving on to the next session, I would like now to open the floor for question and answer. We will take the first 5 questions, then Lilian will answer, then another 5 questions she will answer, so that we are able to accommodate everybody in the next 40 minutes. So the floor is open for the question and answer session.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mutua. Hello?
Yes, Tobias, we can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that Lilian's piece of work is quite good and very timely. Some of the questions I had, at least you've asked them, but I still had one, particularly around the socio-demographics. I think you mentioned as an example that in your questionnaire, you asked questions about age, education, as well as gender. I don't know, I've not seen any data on that, because those really would provide a very rich background as to the kind of people we are dealing with, because my assumption is that you would want to assume that we are dealing with people from one ethnic background in that location, but there could be heterogeneity, and that really contributes a lot in terms of how people perceive and respond to such conflicts. So maybe think about that, and that should tie in to the significance, analysis that Dr. Mutua has mentioned, trying to look at the relationships, what are some of the determinants of such perceptions. It would make it much more richer. The other bit still goes in terms of, from the methodology, you also mentioned focus group discussions and the key AIs, but I think you've really emphasized a lot on the quantitative results, and it appeared as if you integrated both, but I'm not so sure whether that is true, because in between you kept mentioning numbers, but I think the qualitative data could really add more context to the material, and that is something that's quite interesting. I'm really curious to know what maybe the key informants or the experts thought about some of the issues highlighted that was missing. The focus group discussions with the communities really helped rich data, I believe, and that could have really given a very important background and context to the numbers. So think about bringing that forward. The final comment is about the environmental and social impact assessments. You did mention that this was actually conducted at the beginning, but throughout the presentation, I did hear about your assessment of the depth and the spread of that report, whether it addressed some of these things that are now emerging, whether some of the recommendations were ignored during the implementation or not. Because that's the only government official document that's supposed to direct such kind of a mega project investment. I think it's a very important document to look at, because the government will be interested in improving social and environmental impact assessment process, and your results can really go a long way in informing that kind of a process to address these conflicts before they arise. So I think those are the key issues that I had in mind, particularly because under political conflict, you mentioned only 14% of your respondents thought it was an issue, and yet most of what is going on actually ties back to the very beginning that could have been highlighted at the EIA stage. So think about how to integrate that and try to make it much more richer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tobias. The next question.
Hello.
Hello. Go ahead, Wafula.
Yes, this is Caleb. Thanks, Lilian, for the excellent work you presented. I have one quick question. That in terms of building the literature on the subject, I don't know what area you could recommend a further look in terms of building literature on the subject, please.
All right, thank you. The next. Do we have any more questions?
Yes. Could I make a comment?
Yes, Professor Mudama, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kadam. Thank you, Lilian, for a very good and very interesting presentation. Very informative and very detailed. I would like to make a few comments and probably raise questions that you may want to consider to enrich your work. So one of them is a comment in view of the fact that from the onset, from your title, you are talking about there's a keyword association. Yeah, and I'm looking at this from particularly the quantitative parts. And that would probably, a reader would be interested to see the hypothesis that you have set out to address. I guess you might have it somewhere. It would have been interesting to place it so that we see what kind of hypothesis at the onset. So that's the first one in terms of hypothesis. Maybe you have it. You may want to comment on it, or probably you can consider and incorporate as you move along. I come now to the sampling, the sampling method that you used. I noted you talked about 155 households, and I was eager to hear what kind of population were you dealing with? How many people were actually affected? Are they the only 155 households? I believe you may have the information that would answer that question. And you also talked about how you talked to the women and you got information. Then I'm wondering, did you have a separate, in terms of sampling, did you talk to the women or you talked to the household heads? Maybe that's a minor clarification. However, there's one that I thought could be interesting to hear from you. You know, you talked about the number of conflicts. Yeah, so you talk about this one is environmental, this is cultural, and so on. Then I was wondering, in terms of the conflicts, would magnitude matter? You can have a conflict, an environmental conflict, and you can have a cultural conflict, but the magnitudes may be way different so that they are not comparable. What is most important? Is it the environmental in terms of comparison or the magnitude of the conflict? You may want to comment on that. Then probably the last one that I would comment on is the interpretation. Now, I was looking for probably a slide that would give the interpretation of your results. The conclusion is partly giving the interpretation, and the conclusion is alluding to cause and effect. And at the onset, you said you are using descriptive statistics. Now, descriptive statistics may not take us to cause and effect. You may want to consider that, and yeah, because the conclusions, the methods you used cannot lead us to the conclusions that we saw. Maybe there's a method that probably you may want to talk about, but it's something that you may need to consider. And largely that interpretation would be critical. And of course, that a bit of it has been highlighted by Dr. Kadambi in terms of probably the methods you may want to use to do the analysis, so that you can come up with the results that are required. I think it would be interesting if you can be able to help a reader to see if we can use these results to project into the future or to give an early warning. If we have certain conditions, this is what is going to happen if we have another project like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mudama. One last question so that Lilian takes up. All right. There being done, Lilian, the floor is yours.
All right. Can I be heard, Matari?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you for the feedback and for the valuable feedback that has just been given. I know it's a number of it, but I try to respond to what I've picked up, and then the others I'll consider when I'm working on this so that I can be able to incorporate. And with regards to the social demographic characteristics, yes, I had some social graphic, so the demographic characteristics, so I'll be able to look into it and be able to consider as advised. Then in terms of the environmental social impact assessment that was conducted, yes, it was conducted, and of course, according to the resettlement action plan, the community, there are set of regulations that are supposed to be done and things that are supposed to have been implemented before the community was relocated. But in this case, the resettlement action plan was not fully followed to the latter as in the environmental impact assessment. So the community had to be moved before even other items or finished activities, finished projects at the resettlement site. Caleb, I did not get your question well in regards to literature review. Perhaps we'll repeat that, please. Then issue of the sampling, the 155 households. Yes, as I had mentioned, this was part of objective 1 of my thesis on the role of mediation in solving project implementation conflicts. So in particular, I was interested in this particular community, Maasai community, which was residing at the Ontario 4, and where the project Ontario 4, the thermal project, was to be established. And there were a handful, about 1,209 people. But then those who are relocated, of course, they were 100. Initially, it was 150 households. And then 5 additional houses were built following after the mediation. So I was interested in targeting all these 155 households and understanding their individual experiences. And of course, I was the interviews, the household surveys were conducted on household heads, and in the absence on offsprings of 18 years and above. And according to my feedback, my results, 57% of respondents were women. So that is how I also able to capture that issue on low women empowerment, where they felt that their views were not being incorporated. With regards to the magnitude, if I got it well, perhaps I'll say that the most concern that the community had here was about if I have to compare with the other types of conflicts, was about the socioeconomic benefits, because that is what really mattered much unto them. And of course, it also emerged that the community had an alternative. They had a choice. They had a choice to choose a different project area, alternative site for resettlement. But however, they settled for upland, which is near the project site, mainly because of the continued interactions with the developer, so they could continue to benefit. Perhaps we can say that it was a necessary evil. They had to consider and overlook the ecological effect of the environment. So for them, the socioeconomic aspect was more important, of concern, that has really potential to ignite conflict if it's not handled. Yes, I think any other comments? I think I didn't pick them, but I will be able to look into them and consider to improve the quality of this paper.
Do we have any more questions? They're still taking questions.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. If we don't have any coming forth, I just wanted to perhaps add a little bit on what Lilian has mentioned, particularly with reference to the social and environmental impact assessment. Because this is what we've seen quite consistently along most of the major development projects in the country, including the SGR, the LAPSET project, the mega dams, even the Konza Techno City. And I think these are issues that really touch on human rights, and they become major sources of conflict. We've seen lots of demonstrations between environmental groups, social groups, human rights groups, even with the Lamu port. And I think the lessons learned from Lilian's work really need to inform what we do with some of these projects going forward. And the major characteristic that I've seen, and she's already alluded to, is the fact that the EIA is done as a formality, and even before it is authorized or approved, the processes are already ongoing with people being relocated or materials being mobilized to the site. And I think that's one area that really infringes on the issues of participation, issues of representation as envisioned in the Constitution. So I think it is our understanding, therefore, that these projects are good. They are meant to benefit the country, but they should not benefit the country at the expense of those who do not have the power to really participate in these negotiations. Now, one other thing Lilian mentioned in terms of information was the fact that many of the people, particularly who are affected on the ground, did not have adequate information at the beginning insofar as the impacts are concerned, and what they were told mainly revolved around the benefits. You know, when this thing comes on board, you'll get jobs, you'll get this heaven of a land, of a settlement area, but the negatives are always hidden until they emerge. So we might then need to push for accountability in terms of how do we disclose these negatives and positives at the beginning, so that when people make decisions and consent, they make that well aware of the consequences, and the system is set in place to safeguard their benefits and interests to avoid some of these emerging issues when the projects are ongoing. So I think it's very timely, but also I think the lessons learned from this project really needs to inform other works going forward as well.
All right. Thank you, Tobias. We have also another person before I read for Lilian.
Yes.
There's David who is asking. All right, let me hear.
Yes, I can pose
Dr.
one question.
Tanya.
Or yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kathabi, and thank you, Lilian, for good presentation. And I think the slides look much more better than what I'd seen before. So thanks a lot for that. I think I have a question for Lilian, and an observation in that in Kenya, when it comes to the issue about projects, the biggest challenge starts with is a government project, and the serikali things always comes and carries the day that the government is bringing project and people need to take it. So that becomes a first major source of weakness. The second level, and I like what Tobias says, is that the EIA process are much more of a routine process. And if you look, most of the recommendations that are actually put in the EIA are actually implemented or considered. At the end of the process for EIA consultation, what's much more important is, has it been approved? So rarely do we have situations where they say that 10 issues were raised and how many of them have actually been sorted out. So that becomes a major weakness. Now, there's another process that is really given too much weight, and that's the process for RAP. A resettlement action plan is often, most of the time, separated from the EIA process. And is, in most scenarios, not even part of the approval of approved project documents. And most of the people who are normally affected are those who say they were displaced by the project, and that goes into the lab. And whatever goes into the lab, people are never told that I looked at your farm and your compensation is going to be 20,000 or it's going to be 10 million. You only get a figure, that figure often is not negotiated. So that is a major weakness. And the third one is that, this is where my question is the mediation process or conflict management process is a very new phenomenon in Kenya. Most of the time managed by the administrative organs of the government, the county commissioners, the chiefs, and that creates a weakness. And from Lilian's study and from whatever you have been able to gather from out in the field, how do you see the nexus between conflict mediation and environmental impact assessment and the lab process? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thanya. Do you have another question before I read for David Otwoma? All right. David has asked on the chat, are the population relocated provided with electricity or they live without? That needs to come out. Those who are being relocated for a good Kenya, do they also have electricity? In short, were they, the population that was moved or relocated, do they have benefits of electricity? Let's hear. Over to you, Lilian.
All right, fine. Thank you for the input and the comments. I'll start with the last one with regards to whether the population that is relocated has access to electricity. I'll say yes, but then when they were relocated, they did not have access. They were actually required to pay for their own electricity. They were required to pay for so that they can have the poles. About 35,000 shillings for it to be installed, and then of course continue paying their monthly bills. So that was one of the reasons why they had issues with the developer, that they have been relocated from their site and now being to the new site that they are trying to adjust. They should have been the electricity should have just been automatically installed. So after mediation came in place, that is when they were reimbursed that 5 shillings, that 5 Kenya shillings that they paid. They paid for installation. And of course, right now they have access to electricity. Of course, also for sustainability, they foot their own monthly bills. Then on the issue of the nexus between mediation and the environmental impact assessment, perhaps I recommend that in view of this and the results gathered is that it would have been even more better if we can consider having the mediation in the beginning or during the environmental impact assessment so that we can have some of these issues already mediated and agreed upon to avoid potential conflicts when the community is already relocated, yet the project is also supposed to be operational, to avoid the conflicts that come along with it. Thank you.
Okay. Komen has asked whether did you consider the effects of conflict associated with building transmission lines from the plant to the distribution center? Do we also have another question for Lilian?
Oh, sorry.
Are there more questions?
Please repeat the question. Effects of?
The conflicts associated with the building transmission lines from the plant to the distribution center.
No, I did not examine the conflicts, but importantly, I was focusing on the conflicts that arose when the community had to be relocated, when they are told that they had to be relocated to a new land to pave way for the project.
Okay, all right. Dr. Mbali, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you so much, Lilian, for that wonderful presentation. Maybe I missed this, but I wanted to know, were these people sensitized about the real benefits of the project? Thank you.
Yes, Daktari, during the insertion period, the community was informed about the potential, the results of environmental impact assessment. They were informed about the potential, the effects of the project. And of course, importantly, much of it was about the benefits that the project will bring. That is the scholarships, the jobs to the youth, the modern houses, the improved living standards, access to water and electricity. So the numerous socioeconomic benefits were the ones that are really exciting. So they felt like they did not have adequate information about the negative impacts of the project, especially the real dangers posed by this particular project on the community health. So yeah, they feel like it was just a trick, quote in quotes, by the developer to have them move. That is, yeah.
Now, just to follow up on that, if you don't mind, because given the fact that, according to the government, Kenya has a potential of generating 10,000 megawatts of electricity from geothermal resources. So does it mean that, given the background of what you have told us, the likelihood of this project going on is now in doubt, given that people are not fully convinced that the project is for their own good?
I will say that the case of Olkaria 4 geothermal, of course, we have had other number of other geothermal projects ongoing, and as we speak, there are also Olkaria 4 and 6, Olkaria 5 and 6 that are already ongoing, but there's a possibility of another different community to be located to pave way of this particular project. And given it is a government project, and of course that political will and you know the government has and the projects have, according to the constitution, when a project has is potentially will have much impact to the global nation or to the entire nation, they rather resettle the community that is there so that it can pave way for it to be able to contribute to the development of the nation. However, I find that this particular case, they were just perhaps the conflicts were also very less or they were not very violent because the number of the people who were settled were perceived to have been few. But consider this being like maybe where a case where a larger community has to be relocated, then we are likely to have very severe consequences in such scenarios. But given the fact that the project belongs to the government, they have a way. So what will the community say? So ideally, we need to have just proper negotiations and be able to have some win-win situation whereby the community honestly benefit while the entire nation, the government or the developer also have its way.
Okay. Do you have any more questions?
Dr. Kadambi, if I could probably have a final.
Yes, Professor Mugama, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Yeah, Lilian, just a thought. You may want to comment or you may want to note down, especially intervening factors. What would, in your view, would have, was the role of maybe community leadership for or against what was happening, either fueling or otherwise of the conflict? The role of community leadership as an intervening factor. And then would there also have been a possibility of a political situation that would intervene? And here I'm imagining the period when this happened, whether it was just before an election or whatever period or after and so on. What would be your comments?
Yes, Prof, I'll say that the community elders who are, of course, selected by the community themselves to represent them have this reigning authority and therefore potential to influence decisions either way. So in this case, there are some allegations that, of course, they worked closely with the developer to be able to influence, but they played a very big role, or in sense that they had to talk to the PABs to accept the relocation to pave way for the project to proceed. So, of course, if at all, that is why, and because they had that reigning authority, they were able to convince the PABs to accept and also avoid the conflicts, the confrontation. As you say, some of them had an hidden displeasure. They could not speak because of fear of retaliation, and more so, the community leaders had already accepted to, they had talked to the developer and they had already accepted to relocate. So the members of the community had no choice other than to follow what also their leaders had agreed to.
Okay. We have questions for you on the chat. Linda, Kamugisha is asking, did you have a hypothesis? And if you did, you probably share it. Then also Philip is asking, what proportion of the respondents took part in the EIA and were they involved during the RAP process? And also, were the 58% of the respondents coerced or is it involuntarily compiled? Is there a relationship between your results and the EIA results? So, yeah, do we have any other question? All right, Lilian.
Daktari, please come up. Kamugisha's question.
Kamugisha is asking if you had an hypothesis. If you did, please share it.
Okay. In case of I did not have a particular hypothesis, but of course that is something that I can consider while I'll consider other comments. I'll see, but I didn't have the hypothesis. Then in terms of, what did you say in terms of the relationship, the 58%?
Philip has asked for the proportion of the respondents who took part in the EIA and were they also involved in the RAB process? Secondly, were the 58% of your respondents either coerced or involuntarily complied? And is there a relationship between your results and those for the EIA?
Fine, I don't think I understand the question well, but what I can say is that did you say the 58%?
Yes.
The 58% of what?
Of your respondents. I think he's going to your results. If you'd go to the slide for your results, where you have put the 58% of the respondents, either probably he's looking out on whether were they coerced to it, or were they
during
the aspect.
Okay. Yeah. During the relocation, the 57%, who say that
there's
they were
58%. Mm-hmm.
They say that they were ready for relocation, and I had mentioned that because mainly they were ready for relocation because of the information regarding the benefits the project will have brought along, and that's one of the reasons why they were excited and ready to impose the project. So they were ready to relocate. But these 43% who are hesitant to move, you find that 50% of them were the ones who involved in the demonstrations and the protests, while the others had their own fears. They decided to avoid the conflict because of some of the reasons I've mentioned, the influence of the community leaders, and of course the fear of retaliation, and of course being targeted and even deny the conflict. So they were not very much united to resist the relocation.
Okay. He's also asking if your results tally with those for the EIA that was done.
No, I did not get to compare that, but perhaps I'll check and see how that compares.
All right. Do you have another round of questions for Lilian? Yeah. Any more questions? Well, Kamugisha has given you a follow-up. He's saying that he thought that if you have objectives, then you should also, is it that you do not need an hypothesis?
I'll say, as I already mentioned, this is one of, it is the objective one of my thesis. So basically, of course, the overall thesis, I had three objectives. Of course, I can still convert them to hypothesis, but I had the overall thesis, the one that has three objectives. So this is just objective one of that particular thesis.
Okay. Then we also have Gilbert Mutai saying a good presentation. And did the political leaders oppose relocation process due to political implications, or did this group collaborate, or are they among those who were coerced?
That reminds me of a question that had also been asked of whether the political issues or leaders played a role. I would say that, of course, there were confirmation or rather respondents. Part of the results, part of the respondents were that the local leaders, the district commissioner, the respondents saw that they were being used to sweet talk them to relocate. So for them, they feel like they were speaking the same language with the developer and, of course, the government.
Okay. All right. Do we have any more questions? All right. I have one or two for you, Lilian. The issue of social cultural dynamics, how does it play around or play about when it comes to the relocation? In this point where you say the Maasais are used to their manyatas, and now the project has given them a refurbished house, tiled house, and their culture dictates that he can have 50 wives in one compound. Were they given how did the project respond to such issues of culture? And the second is on the issue of land tenure. In Kenya, we pride ourselves with the title deed. So when they were relocated, were they also given title deed so that they feel that they could exchange their ancestral land for a title deed somewhere else? In terms also of the environmental impacts, how are they being handled? Because they're still, if the project finishes or collapses, are they also going to go back to a degraded environment?
All right, starting with the social cultural aspect. Yes, while it was inevitable that the community had to be resettled, they were moved to the modern houses, and of course those are some of the concerns that the community members had, because their houses were not incompatible to their Maasai, the manyatas that are used to having single manyata for girls and boys and their own, so that they can be able to carry on with their cultural practices. So this is one of the concerns that they had that are also led to the conflict and the coming up onto mediation to try. However, therefore, the recommendation, of course, of this study will be probably there needed to be like at least some participative, the planning, proper planning, and of course, proper planning, including the community members in the even building this particular household, so that they can be able to accommodate, like maybe have several units to be able to accommodate their concerns. But of course, it limits on their cultural aspects, which is their concern, but they have no choice. They have to live with it. And with regards to land tenure, yes, when they relocated, they didn't have a title deed. And that is the reason why they also became uncleased, displaced, and started to complain to the financial that we have relocated, yes, but you don't have a title deed. So after the mediation came on board, that is when they now, as we speak, they now have a title deed. But of course, it's still restrictive because there are things that they cannot do with that particular land. For example, putting up maybe a hotel or something, like using it for their own benefit. So it's also a bit restrictive. Then in terms of the environmental impacts, their efforts, of course, it's one of the things that after the mediation, that also one of the things the developer thinks that it's one of the kind of impractical. It's quite costly for them because they have made efforts to stabilize the gullies, for example, but because the area is associated with this volcanic type of soil, which is very prone to erosion. We have frequent rains and flooding and erosion. So the gullies keep on eroding. So they keep on going back to try and to stabilize the gullies, build the gabions, and also plant some things to try and prevent this. So it is one of the challenges, but they are making efforts, though it's a bit of a challenge. Yeah. And also making this particular exercise a bit expensive.
Okay. Are there more questions?
Yeah, sure. Over here, Tobias again.
All right, Tobias.
Good. Lilian, I'll take you back to some bits of the key informant interviews, or rather the experts, particularly because I presume that you had a lengthy conversation with the Wangari geothermal staff, particularly the environmental team, because they have a very vibrant team that really does a lot of issues around that. But also how that then links with the issues of the economics, particularly the economic as well as the livelihoods options for the team or for the communities around there. Now, one of the impacts you mentioned was that they were concerned about human-wildlife conflict, particularly predation from the hyenas. Did you have a feeling as to what the administration or the institution is planning to do to address such kind of issues in collaboration with the Kenya Wildlife Service, whom are also based around that place because of the Hell's Gate National Park? And so if communities are going to lose livestock, which is their mainstay as a result of the displacement or disturbance from the project, then there must be contingency measures to try and address that. Did you have that as a feeling that that's something they are concerned about as opposed to the direct conflict they are facing from the communities or resistance?
Yes, there are efforts that are being made, considering that to be able to address this concern with regards to hyenas and livestock, wildlife conflict, because there is now the erection of the fence that is being done to be able to prevent the wildlife from accessing into the community and maybe, of course, killing their livestock. But of course, also the fencing itself is still also a challenge. Yes, it will help, but it now also contributes to restriction of access to other particular areas, including, of course, the areas also near the National Park. Hell's Gate National Park. Yeah.
Okay. Professor Mugama?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kadhambi. Again, I would like to make a comment. I see Kamugisha has raised a question. I guess it's posed not necessarily to Lilian, and that's why I would like to respond to it. The question of whether you can replace objectives with hypotheses. Now, and this I'm addressing now to Kamugisha. The point here is that it will depend on your research design. If you are using descriptive statistics, then you don't need an hypothesis. But if you are using inferential statistics, whether you have an objective or not, there must be an hypothesis. Because this is where you will talk about cause and effect. You say this one was caused by this and that. And you want to, if you want to explain it statistically or interpret it from a statistical point of view. I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Dr. Kadhambi.
Thank you very much, Professor Mugama. That also actually will also help Lilian and any other students so that you're able to understand the statistical aspects of your research and how you can relate it to them. Do we have any more questions? Okay. There being none, I want to say thank you very much for this question and answer session. I'm sure it has helped you, Lilian, to see how to improve, to add on, to embellish your work. And we are very grateful on that. A summary is that, yes, you are well prepared for your presentation. It is good so that our take home is that we need to understand what we are doing, our research methods, the sampling, how sampling is done, the sampling frames, the research design, which also will dictate whether we are using an hypothesis or not. What kind of statistical data are we using? Is it the inferential? Are we going to use descriptive as advised? So it is, all this helps us to understand that the conclusion also needs to be from what the result has come about from. Again, the issue of recommendations are meant to enhance the results they are supported by the results, so that when we give policy briefs, then we are able to say this is where we are coming from. So Lilian, you probably may consider having a policy brief. I don't think there's anybody with a question for us now. I would like to render our director's apology. He was held up in another webinar as this is also going on. So we would please accept his apology. He would have loved to join us, to be with us and guide us. I'm seeing Frida would like Frida wanted to speak, but yeah. So thank you very much for being part of us. And we thank you very much also for taking time to come and help improve the process all along. So I'll ask Irene, if you could say a closing prayer for us.
Yes, thank you, Bessie, and I'm sorry about the beginning. Lilian, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Learned a lot at this stage and time, and I know you're going to come out very well. Let's pray. Father, in Jesus' name, I want to thank you and bless you for your mercy and for your goodness and your faithfulness, which endure forever. Thank you for helping Lilian as we went collecting her data, for protecting her, and even putting it all together. It's not an easy task. Thank you, Lord, because strength and resilience comes from you. And as you complete this study, Lord, we commit her into your hands. The Lord will make it even better for her, and she'll come out shining, and it will be a study that will be useful even in this nation and beyond. Thank you, Lord, for all the people who have attended today and for all her supervisors. Thank you for Bessie, for the way she has guided this discussion very well. We give you glory and we give you honor even as we part now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. Good
Thank
evening.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. All right, Lilian, I've got a text for you in the chat. Please check it out.
Fine, I'll check. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, you're welcome.
Sasa. Poa. Kidogo tu. Kidogo tu.